To create is to give meaning. And to give meaning is to give weight to something. And to give weight to something is a gram. And the program is the system through which we operate. Knowledge is a weight, but understanding is an enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
So, the knowledge is heavy to carry, but the understanding is a level of freedom that sets us free. Yeah, I mean, information exists without people. Knowledge exists. Knowledge is information that exists that people use. But information exists outside of people. Information is everywhere all of the time. Yeah, in that sense, knowledge is information that you have accepted and that you are hopefully willing to process. A lot of people say that they believe, but they don't have the knowledge or any information, any real information to support whatever it is they believe. They believe what they believe because their life is more comfortable with the belief than without the belief. We generally invite belief. We use belief to invite into our lives things that we think will make us more comfortable. Things that explain to us the world in a way that we understand it. Over Christmas is a good time to reflect and think about things, and it's always interesting to me to look back at over Christmas at the Christmas story, and to see what is real for me in that story and what is not real, what I can learn from those stories. And I'm always puzzled by the great question. The great question of the modern world for me is, did Jesus live? That is the foundational pillar of a lot of the structure and philosophy and the laws and the rules of Western society. And it all rests on this character from history that we are, I think we're unsure whether he was real or not. And maybe he was, and information got lost in time. Maybe he's a composite of other characters. It's now an unanswerable question, because there's as much information to say that it's all a composite of different stories and mythologies and other things brought together, as there is to say, well, look, all of these other people lived, so that he must have lived amongst all of these other people, because all these other people said that he lived. So it's a great puzzle, and I always find myself, trying to become comfortable with that paradox. Well, there are books written by people who met him and followed him and lived with him, which suggests that he lived. I think we're pretty sure that they lived, because they then built their own churches and they carried their message to different places, and they are referenced in history as real people. Yeah. So we're pretty sure that they lived. But almost all references to Jesus have been erased from history. Almost all other references. So there's very little that we have to go on. I mean, there's the missing 12 years. Like the first 12 years are very, there's almost nothing written about him for the first 12 years of his life, which was spent in Egypt, apparently. But this is assuming that he lived, of course. So, and that, the mixing the natural and the supernatural together makes a great story as well. And of course, that was done many times through history. Then there's the obvious practical symbolic references in Northern Hemisphere Western culture, which is that at the darkest time of the year, the light arrives to save the world. And there's a whole matrix of control and contradiction in the writings that exist that make it very hard to see things clearly. There's you can read everything two ways, right? And there's enough apparent contradictions in the Bible to give the masters enough to master with and the servants enough to serve with. It covers almost everything for everybody. But then again, it still depends very much how you use it.
Bible seems to be an agenda.
Yeah, yet it's not without wisdom. The information in it is not useless. Yeah, I think it's still very much a collection of writings where you can find what you want to find. And maybe if you're very lucky, you can find what you need to find. It's not a bad place to start in terms of understanding history. One of the great problems is that people don't understand the historical context. I mean, the story the biblical story, you could say that has many different beginnings. But let's say the Christmas story, you know what it really begins with? It begins with tax collection. That's what the story begins with. It begins with tax collection. The Roman emperor decides that all his subjects should pay tribute to him with taxes. And that is why Mary and Joseph have to travel to Bethlehem, because that is Joseph's family of origin. That's the origin of where he came from. So there's so much there. And if you just take that one tiny little piece of information, that it begins with tax collection, and how many other dominoes fall over after that happens, the intended or unintended consequences of everything. It's a rallying cry in dark times. Now, if we look at the parallels with modern times are epic, basically. So that just came to me as I was watching a cartoon with my kids about the birth of Jesus, and this was in the cartoon, right? This was the beginning of the cartoon. The cartoon was explaining that taxes were the reason for the initiation of this story and these things happening.
Yeah, typical example of programming our children. Taxes are normal.
Yeah, but in the sense that the taxes are bad. It was presented in the senses of taxes are normal, yes, but it wasn't that taxes are normally a good thing. It wasn't presented like that, so it was interesting. So it was just a little thing, but it stayed in my mind. I was like, yeah, because and there's obviously so much more, and you obviously find what interests you. You see what you want to see
Mhm.
in the stories.